0 to 3 years experience is 127K.
Is that average?
That's on average between all metros.
What's it like working as a geologist for an oil and gas company? Is this a dying career as we switch toward clean energy? What are these companies doing to evolve with this transition? Why do we still need oil and gas? How much does one make at this job? Today, I had the pleasure of speaking with an old friend from grad school, Julia Astro, who has become a well-rounded geologist and geophysicist in the oil and gas industry. And in this interview, she walked us through all of these tough questions and gives some top-notch advice for students out there looking to pursue a career in geology, whether it be in this industry or any field of geology. So I highly recommend you stick this one out to the end. She has such amazing insight from a diverse range of experiences within the field of geology. So without further ado, let's get into this conversation.
Hello, I'm Julia. So I'm a petroleum geologist and geophysicist here in Fort Worth, Texas. And I work for a small private equity-backed oil and gas company. So my undergrad degree was from a small place in Michigan called Lake Superior State University, and that's a Bachelors of Science in Geology. And then I went on to the University of Texas, El Paso, where me and Rachel met, and got my master's in geophysics there. So I do both geology and geophysical work for a small company, which is pretty awesome. And then I also volunteer my time and just became president-elect of the Fort Worth Geologic Society here in town. So we're going to be doing a lot of cool outreach and luncheons and baseball games, like all that fun social stuff that we do too. So, and the other thing I should mention, if anybody's from the local area, students eat free at our luncheons. So you can check our website to see what our schedule is, and we have sponsors. I think it's Roji and S&P as of last year, probably will be again this year, that sponsor student luncheons, so you don't have to pay anything. You just come show up and network with people.
Wow.
So it's completely free.
There
most
you
of our
go.
events are free or like $10 for students to come to. So,
Students
yeah.
in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, which I know there's a lot of big schools
There's
there.
a lot of people here. Yeah.
Yes, that's awesome. Well, thanks for sharing that. So first, I'd like to know what kind of resources you and or your company are exploring for or producing.
Yeah, so we produce both oil and gas, and we are up on what's called the Central Basin platform. So we're over in West Texas in the Permian Basin, but we're not doing what a lot of the other big players are that are in either the Delaware Basin or the Midland Basin that are producing shales. We are mostly producing out of carbonate rock. So what we're doing is a little bit different. So we are the platform that's in between the two basins. So it's like an ancient reef system that we're going through and exploiting the oil and gas out of. It's really cool. It's probably one of the more challenging things that I've done. A lot more structure, a lot more planning that goes into it as opposed to some of the cookie cutter shale wells that you can get a lot of the time.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And we'll get into later some more detail on like how you actually find oil and gas deposits as geologists. But before we get into that, and normally I would get a little bit more into what you do for your job before we get to viewer questions, but for this one specifically, we got a lot of viewer questions, and I want to address a couple of them because I think they highlight some kind of old-fashioned views or maybe misperceptions about the oil and gas industry today, and I kind of want to address that up front before we get into what you do specifically. So one viewer, for example, asked, why are you still working for an industry that's harming people around the world? So can you just tell us a little bit about why the oil and gas industry is still so important even today as we transition toward clean energy? And could you also discuss a little bit about some of the ways the industry is evolving with this push toward more renewables?
For sure. Yeah. So I guess the biggest thing is that oil and gas are in everything. So not just like a lot of people are thinking gasoline powered cars, natural gas, sort of thing, like just producing electricity or making cars go. But it's so much more than that. And I actually wrote a list of things down, just of different things. So we've got like PVC and plastics, plumbing, anything like that, pharmaceuticals, so like in medications and stuff like that, or even just that industry in general, polyester nylon, so like things that are in a lot of clothes and the ways that we make clothing, the ways that we make things waterproof a lot of the times are oil-based. Cosmetics, a lot of different just makeup and stuff like that, asphalt, things we use to make roads, if we're not making it just from crushed aggregate. Contact lenses, which is a thing that is very important to me, are made from plastics, which are a part of the petroleum industry.
Oh, wow.
Adhesive, sealants, anything plastic at all. Vehicle tires is a big one. And my favorite Nalgene bottles, my reusable bottles, are plastic and made from petroleum products. So it's a very difficult thing to avoid. And it's also a thing that, other than just being in a lot of things, it makes things cheaper. That's the point I was trying to make. So a lot of these products are things that are consumer goods, and I kind of hate that we throw a lot of them away. I think they should be more than single use, similar to your reusable bottles and things like that. But one of the things that was really interesting is consumer behavior as well, when you look at it. So have you ever heard of a company called like Taterware, or familiar with them at all?
No, I don't know.
So they are a company that makes like plates and utensils out of like composted potatoes, more or less, like dehydrated potatoes, and they're totally biodegradable. This has been around since the early 2000s, but it hasn't taken off because it's twice as expensive as just buying the little Dixie plates with the plastic coating on them. So consumers will almost always buy the cheapest product unless they're well off and can make the decision to be different. So it's kind of a cost thing. So unless wages go up to keep up with the fact that we start taking these cheaper plastics and stuff out of things, then it's going to be really difficult for people just to afford everyday things. On top of some of them, we don't really have good stuff for, like making contact lenses out of not petroleum products is incredibly difficult. So I think there's always a place for it. It's just a matter of, how much of it can we feasibly phase out to not be producing as much of it in the future. So it's going to be a transition rather than just like an all-at-once sort of thing that I have here. I guess the thing to keep in mind is like most of us are not a bunch of climate deniers. A lot of us get really like this industry gets really demonized because historically in a lot of the big companies, it has been pretty bad. Like I lived through the BP oil spill on Earth Day. Like that was terrible. They came up with a new term for it called ecocide. Like it was bad, and because of negligence and the things that were done there. But a lot of us smaller guys, which just seems to be the way that things are going, they're either consolidating into all of these mega companies, or it's a lot of small people like us that are going through, and we're trying to be the best stewards we can. Like the company that I work for, we have an environmental scientist on staff. Whenever we go to put a pad on the ground, which is usually maybe on the order of 10 acres, we'll drill about 4 wells from it. We have to make sure that we either set aside or we're not destroying habitat for, I think it's like a spiny lizard or something that's out there in the West Texas desert, and making sure that remediation's done right, or if there are any spills, they're cleaned up immediately. And just making sure that we don't put like water injection wells on known faults, and things like that, even if you do get a permit for it. Just like be a good steward and be a good neighbor. And we're actually on pretty good terms with the people that own the surface land, where we don't own it. We own it in a lot of places. And so a lot of them are ranchers. They're just like little ranchers and farmers and people that are just out there with their cattle. And we're like, hey, we're going to come through and put a pad here. We're going to pay you this much for the 10 acres that we're taking because that's fair market value. Are you okay with that? And they're like, yeah, that's cool. And then we're just like, also, we need to put a pond in here for frack water, but then you can use it as a pond after because it's all fresh water. And they're like, that's great. My cattle will love that. Oh, we got to build roads out here to it too. I'm getting roads? Then yeah, let's do it. Kind of thing. Like we make a good relationship with these people. So the larger companies some of that might get lost, but a lot of us smaller people are doing the best we can to be good stewards. Because it's still a commodity that we need. And until it's not, then
exactly.
we'll continue to do that.
Exactly. It's still something we need, and exactly. Until it's not, let's do the best we can. It's so funny you mentioned the lizard, the spiny lizard or whatever it is.
I think that's what it is, yeah.
It's Saskia, when she was on, she also mentioned that a lot of their projects get, put aside or like paused because of rare organisms and stuff. And she mentioned specifically a special lizard. So it's
There's a lot of them out there,
There's
I guess.
a lot of special lizards that contribute to biodiversity. That's so funny. Oh my gosh.
And the other thing to keep in mind is from the electricity generation side of things here. So we don't get enough megawatt hours out of alternative energy alone to produce the amount of energy that we need to live our lives as they are today. And you can go look it up, the number of megawatt hours and things like that we get from solar and wind are incredibly low compared to things like natural gas power plants, which are incredibly efficient. The most efficient thing I found was nuclear energy. So if we start putting nuclear power plants all over the place, we can probably phase out a lot of these natural gas or even coal power plants that are all over the U.S. As long as, we're not scared of it as we used to be. They're a lot safer than they used to be, we'll put it that way. And we have a lot of good safety systems in place for that. And geothermal was actually the next most efficient thing, but obviously we can't do that everywhere. Iceland runs a lot of their stuff, which I just visited recently, off of geothermal power. And it's incredibly efficient. And actually, the water comes out of the ground so hot that they have to cool it down, and then it kind of, goes down to the power plant, and then the steam turns the turbine to create electricity that's there. So it's just like, it's like a necessary evil in some ways, just because it's in so many products and it produces so much energy that it's difficult for us to fully replace or get rid of it. So, and me knowing that, it's like, we're probably going to at least be doing this for another 30 years, at least another career or two in there before we really start to downscale on what we're doing.
I had heard the same things about geothermal. You can't do it everywhere, but where you can and where it's good, it's really good. And nuclear, also much safer than people give it credit for nowadays. It can be really powerful. But even spreading all of these newer renewable and clean energy technologies and new alternative energies, the transition to that takes a lot of power that we get from oil and gas and technology that we make using power from that. It's like, you're exactly right. It has to be a transition because we need that to transition. We could not ever just stop that and then go to this new thing. We need that to move toward this. And this was also kind of getting at some of the viewer questions as well. With, the transition to more clean and renewable energy, are oil and gas companies evolving or starting new initiatives or sectors kind of devoted toward that? And is that changing the types of positions and jobs available at these companies?
Yeah, so some of them have. I know that BP was doing it. I don't know. They have a different CEO now, and I'm not. I was an intern there for a very short time during COVID. So I just kind of got whatever I was exposed to there. I work for a very small company now, so it's very different for us, the way that we approach things. But I know with the big companies, there was BP Wind, BP Solar, stuff like that, different sectors that were working. And one of the coolest things they were doing, and I think it was a summer project one of the geology interns was working on, was he was using bathymetry and just like the top part of the seismic data to look at landslide potential on this like defunct oil field that they had to put wind turbines up in safe places, offshore wind. And I was like, that's awesome because it doesn't really take up any land space and nobody's really using that space for anything else anyways. So I was like, that's really cool. So he was looking at areas that were prone or not prone to landslides to put more of those wind turbines up. Really, really cool.
That sounds really cool, yeah.
They hire a lot of environmental people, too, to make sure they're within those regulations and that they're following the proper code of ethics and all that sort of stuff. So it's done a lot safer nowadays. And then the regulating bodies keep an eye on things as well. So it's like, we have what's called the Railroad Commission here in Texas, which has nothing to do with railroads and has everything to do with regulating oil and gas. So I don't remember the exact history of that. Somebody's welcome to look it up. I just know that the Railroad Commission is the regulatory body here in Texas to make sure we're following all the rules for injection wells and where we put wells and spacing rules and all that good stuff.
Yeah, no, I love that you mentioned that. I just had on Saskia. I don't know when these episodes will go up, but I just had on Saskia talking about geotechnical engineering, and she's in the UK, but she was talking about all these regulations that they have to take into account when they're building. But, same thing goes into oil and gas and where you put the wells and all these things. And
a lot of them have carbon capture units as well. So like Oxy has carbon capture. So we call it CCUS a lot of the time. And there's a couple different ways that they can do that. So they were experimenting with something called direct capture, which was like this big ridiculous set of like fans that they put out. I don't even remember exactly where it was. And it was like directly capturing carbon out of the air for them to do something else with, or inject it. And then a lot of it is looking at old, again, defunct oil fields, or people that just drilled dry holes back in the day. So a well that didn't have any oil in it, it was all water or nothing. And then injecting carbon into there. And so it's like reverse oil and gas in a way. And there's a lot of red tape around that. I wish that it was regulated the same way as it is to drill a well. They make it really difficult because they're like, it needs to be stored forever. And I'm like, does that mean the water we're injecting doesn't need to be stored forever? Like, I don't know why they make it so difficult. And the other thing to keep in mind with carbon capture, and the reason it's so like difficult and sort of an emerging thing is, yes, it's a good thing to do, but it doesn't make a product right now. So if you don't have a commodity, like oil and gas, we're selling a commodity, or mining, you're selling a commodity, or agriculture, or whatever, it doesn't sell anything. It somebody has to pay to have it taken away. And a lot of the times that's taxpayer dollars and subsidies that make it worth doing because it doesn't make money.
Yeah.
So I'm interested to see what the appetite is for that in the coming years. The other thing that might be better than the carbon capture, somebody will have to look at the numbers other than myself, is actually just planting trees. The amount of carbon that trees store and sap up over their lifetime, I think is more like cost efficient than these direct capture things that I think are kind of ridiculous. But the actual injection that they're doing, I'm like, I wonder if we could just like plant a forest of trees and that would just be better.
You would
in the
think,
long run.
like, instead of building a machine to capture carbon from the atmosphere, we could just plant the ones that evolved to do it. I don't know enough about it. I don't know enough about the capture.
I'm not on the carbon capture side. It might be interesting if you do talk to somebody that does do CCUS.
That's a great point, yeah.
They would know all about it. It'd be really interesting. But what's interesting is they do almost the same thing that I do if they're geologists, but in reverse.
Yeah.
So we have very similar skill sets, which is cool.
But it's like it's the same companies, to my understanding, that are
sometimes
operating both. Okay, yeah, interesting. Yeah, I've already gotten 2 ideas from this conversation. I want to have somebody that works in nuclear on, and I want to have someone that works in carbon capture. I feel like those would be really interesting, and maybe geothermal too. All the things.
Yeah, different energy production, right?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I don't know anything about it. So I'm glad we're having this conversation. Okay, so we'll get back to more viewer questions later. But first, let's talk a little bit about what you specifically do for your position, kind of what your day-to-day looks like, and maybe kind of a little bit about how your time is spent, whether you're in the field or office more, stuff like that. So what's your day look like in your job?
Yeah, so I'm like 95% office-based, honestly. Which I think a lot of people have the misconception, or maybe some people think that I'm a mudlogger or something like that, like out on the rig. But I don't do any of that. I actually work like 7 to 4, and then I have half days on Friday, is the schedule that I have. So it's pretty flexible at this company I'm with. And a lot of companies are like that, or you get every other Friday off or whatever, working 9s or 10s or something like that. And so like my first thing I do is I get up and I work for small companies. So I wear a lot of hats. I start with operations for the day. So I'll look and see, okay, what did we drill last night if I didn't get up in the middle of the night to check it. Depends on how fast we were drilling, when I went to that kind of thing. But I will load in the latest survey, and then I'll go through and actually steer the well and check I have people that are called geosteerers that work for me that are contract. And so they will go through and steer the well and let us know exactly where we are in section. And so I check that first thing in the morning to make sure that I'm happy with their interpretation and that it matches what I think is happening as well.
And that's all done like on a computer.
Yeah, with different program. We use something called GeoDirect, but StarSteer is probably the gold standard for the industry right now for software that does that. So you just get your little gamma ray survey, and it'll be like, however many feet. They're usually in 100 feet increments. And then you take that and you can stretch it, squeeze it, that sort of thing, fault it by moving it, and get it to match the log that's next door to you to figure out exactly where you are in section. It's really cool.
Wow.
So that's actually a really good thing that a lot of people with a bachelor's degree can do in geoscience. Okay. You don't have to go get a master's for that. You can actually go, if you have a basic understanding of geosteering and the software, you can go get a job in that basically tomorrow if there's enough rigs to sustain it a lot of the time. Usually you have like 1, 2, 3 rigs that you watch, and that's it. So you do work 12s, but you get like, 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off kind of deal with that. So it's not a terrible role, and you can do it from anywhere.
Wow. Yeah, no, I think what you said is so powerful, because so many people and so many comments that I see that people don't fully understand, or they just assume that geologists all work outside to at least some extent. And they would probably guess, based on what I see, that it's over 50% of the time that we're out in the field. But most of the time, it's like you said, 90-10. And it's 90%.
I spend time with 3 monitors in front of me most of the day. So I have the operations portions. That's just like my morning a lot of the time. And then I move on usually later in the day into what we call a lot of the times development geology or development, geophysicist, depends on what hat I'm wearing that day. Am I a geologist today or a geophysicist today? It just depends on what we need. And so that's working with my team of geologists, and I have a team of engineers, usually like a reservoir engineer, a drilling guy, and then we have what they call asset engineers that oversee our completions and recompletions or workovers that we do on all of our different wells. So I interface with a lot of engineers, and I've been learning a lot about what they do, which is great. We get along really well. Spend a lot of time looking at what we call well logs, which is just looking at, similar to how I mentioned, the gamma ray logs and resistivity and stuff like that, and picking where the formations change, so that way I can map the structure or faults or whatever over the whole area. And then I have seismic data to assist me as well. I'm the only one at the company that uses seismic data, so it's been like a new thing for our company for me to go through and kind of explain what it is I'm looking at and how we can use it to plan better wells. So that's really fun. But yeah, just any data I can get my hands on. Geochemical data I use sometimes. It's just because I have 3 minors as well for my undergrad: math, chemistry, environmental sciences. So I have an ability to understand a lot of different things. So sometimes, not so much with this company, with past companies, they just feel like, hey, Julia can figure this out, and they just kind of throw me a report of some geochemical stuff, and I'd figure it out. I'd be like, oh yeah, this is saying something about the shales, and oh, we should change the way we do our completion. That's what they're saying because of blah, blah, whatever. So.
Actually, I was just gonna ask, like with the seismic data, was that something that you learned in school or something you learned on the job?
I learned a lot about it and how it was acquired, and spent some time interpreting it mostly while I was at UTEP. I did do a little bit during my undergrad because my my mentor and professor that I really liked there was a geologist and geophysicist, which I didn't realize was weird until I got into industry, that usually people pick one or the other. But I just really like both, and I just like science. So
this is the beauty of geology, I always say, is that you can do so many combinations of science with earth science, because you can combine it with physics and chemistry and all the things.
Yeah, it's just like, oh, do you like chemistry and rocks? Okay, you can go do geochem. You like physics and rocks or math? Okay, cool. You can go do some geophysics. Or maybe you really like it's a dying art, but we need people that do processing geophysics. So people that are really into softwares and math, and then spend the time figuring out how to do all the migrations and processing of the seismic, so then we can then take it and interpret it. That's starting to become a dying art, so that's definitely something we need more people doing. And then the last part of my day, more or less, is just like we work, like I mentioned, middle of the night. Sometimes I have to get up for stuff. Is they give us about 5 weeks of PTO to take. So because we're constantly on, we get a lot of PTO to go do other stuff. And then on top of that, usually I'd say 5% of my time, maybe a couple days each business quarter, I will go out to the rigs to meet a lot of the company men that run the rigs, the mud loggers that are actually physically looking at the rocks and sending me reports, the directional drillers that are giving me the surveys so that I can do my geosteering, and just we have an entire field office in Midland and field staff that are right next to our assets, more or less. And so I spend a lot of time talking to them, over the phone, but it's always good to meet them in person and to build that camaraderie, like with your company man, when you're saying, hey man, I got to drop our target 50 feet or whatever, and he's like, who's this crazy person telling me what to do? Now he knows who I am, so I could just be like,
oh, that's cool.
Hey Steve, can you drop the target 50 feet? Oh yeah, no problem. That's cool. We can do that. No big deal. Yeah, we got you, kind of thing. So it becomes a little bit more like, hey, I got your back.
Is that something you think you're afforded because you're at a small company?
I think so. I've really only been out to rig visits with small companies. And as long as I'm following all the safety stuff, like my hard hat and my steel toes and all that sort of stuff, they're pretty okay with me being out there. And a lot of times I'm with like our drilling manager, or I go out and I'm with the company man walking around. So it's not just me, wandering a rig site. So I'm not sure how much larger companies do that, but I think it's important for us to be close with our consultants because we ask so much of them. They're our eyes and ears out there.
Yeah, absolutely. So what initially drew you to the field, and was it always your plan, or was it a winding road?
I think geology in general tends to be a winding road for a lot of people, where they kind of fall into it and they're like, oh, this is kind of a cool thing. I knew that I wanted to be a geologist. Yeah. So I was a weird high school student that was like, I'm going to go for a geology degree.
No
and people
way.
are like, that's so weird. And I'm just like, I just really like, rocks and outdoor, and it's an outdoor
That's
science.
unique in high school.
It came easily to me was the other thing. So the thing that drew me to geology initially was I actually met a volcanologist when my folks took me to Hawaii once for Christmas. We just took this really big family trip out there. It was like a huge deal for our little middle class family to get out to Hawaii. Like, such a magical experience. And then
Wow.
I met a volcanologist while I was there, and we also met a guy that took us on a hike. I think he still gives like geology hikes through one of the canyons on Kauai. And I was just like, I want this dude's job. Like, this is so cool. Like him just telling me about like rocks and nature and how the island formed and how that canyon had formed and everything. And I was just like, this is amazing. And so I knew I wanted to do that. And then, wandered through undergrad a little bit and was like, well, I like structure and, like the mathy sort of stuff. And then I was like, maybe I want to do some geophysics. And then I met my last year that I was there, I met, it was actually during one of the oil crashes. I think it was like 2016, maybe 2018, somewhere around there. Things crashed out a little bit in the oil industry. So one of the PhD guys who was working for an oil company came to Lake State and was like, oh, I'm going to teach like SED and sequence strat and stuff like that, like a little more of the soft rock stuff. And he was an ex-oil guy. And so talking to him, I was like, this is fascinating. And he based all of his classes on as if we were like oil prospecting and doing like net sand maps and looking at well logs. And I was just like, this is so cool. And I loved the challenge of it. It was just different than anything else that I had really done. And I liked that everything we looked at was different. You had to like really critically think through it. And like, I get bored if I do the same thing all the time. Like, that's just not like, some people love that. They love knowing what to expect every day. For me, I don't always know what to expect every day.
No, I love that you said that, because I also and I like academia for this, is that I can do this research project and that project and collaborate on that. And I can do a lot of different things, and I can kind of really, do what I'm interested in. And I wasn't sure. I love what you said about changing it up every day. I wasn't sure how the same it is for you all the time, or is it more of everything's switching all the time?
For me, things are very different because the area I'm working is very structurally complex. So we're drilling horizontal wells through it instead of drilling vertical wells. So it makes it really challenging. Some of the stuff out in the basins, because I have worked in the basins as well, can be a little bit more cookie cutter. But even then, you're still trying to steer a well within a 30-foot window that's 10,000 feet below the ground. That's not easy.
That is so cool.
Even if the well planning's a little bit easier, it's still, you got to keep it in a very tight window. So, yeah.
Wow. Speaking of where these wells are and just where oil and gas is, I guess, where's the coolest place that your job has taken you?
Yeah, I'd say the coolest place I've kind of wandered to, because like I said, a lot of it's office space and stuff, is when I do get out there. I actually stood on the floor in a rig called Akita 90. And at the time, the company man was telling me, and I really hope that this is true, that it's the largest land rig in North America right now, between U.S., Canada, Mexico. Not offshore. The offshore rigs are huge. It's a totally different ballgame over there. But the largest land rig in North America, and it's about 32 feet off the ground. So I want you to picture 32 feet standing on this rig floor, watching, the pipe come down on the top drive, just drilling, like out in the West Texas sunset. It was just, it was like a really magical thing, because I drove by so much of those as a student, like doing the Imperial Barrel Award program, like working kind of as an oil worker during one of my semesters, and stuff like that. And driving by these things every time we went from El Paso to like Houston or Dallas or whatever to do these presentations we were doing. And like, I was like, man, one day I'm going to go stand on one of those, And so like, it was like a surreal moment. Yeah, I know. It was like a surreal moment.
The biggest one.
The biggest one. On top of that, I'm like, how did our little rinky-dink company get this? And I was like, oh, nobody wants to pay that day rate. But then when we did 4,000 feet in one 24-hour period. And I was like, oh, that's why we're paying this day rate for this well. That's like, that was our company record. It was kind of obnoxious. I woke up and was like, nobody called me. We drove 4,000 feet. We have to be out of zone, kind of thing. And I was just like, oh, okay, we're good. Somehow we stayed for 4,000 feet or however much it was overnight. I think it was 2,000 and some change. We stayed within that 30-foot window, so that's why nobody called me.
Oh my God, that's so cool. Wow. That is nuts. Okay, kind of in the same vein, but like craziest now, what is your craziest experience you've had, if you have one?
Yeah, so I was trying to think of that. It was like a lot of the stuff that I do is like a lot of aha moments and stuff like that. But I think my favorite, like just like story time sort of thing that I have is we were, so I was actually working from home because we had a snowstorm. So I just remoted in, and my husband was sitting at this computer and I was sitting at the one behind us here. And I was just working on all the seismic and all of my well logs and stuff like that. And if you're not versed in it, it's literally a bunch of colored squiggly lines on a screen.
Yeah.
And I've got like a 3-screen setup of all of this going, and it literally looks like you're insane. And he turns around and he's like designing something on his program, and I can tell what he's designing. You know, he does a bunch of manufacturing things. He's designing, okay, whatever. He turns around and he's like, "Are you okay?" And I go, "What do you mean?" He's like, "What are you looking at right now?"
As somebody,
"Are you okay?" He's like, he's literally a bunch of colored squiggly lines, and I don't know how you make sense of any of that.
That's so true. As somebody who is a geologist who, you know, went to UTEP, I saw like seismic data. I saw, you know, I agree. Like, I never studied it and I don't even know I'm a geologist and I don't know what it means. It's just a bunch of squiggly lines. I'm so glad that there are people out there like you that can interpret it.
It's like, it's a good intersection between art and science. So I paint a lot too. So I like do a lot of landscape painting and stuff. So like having like the very math physics side of my brain, and then having the very, you know, like, I don't know, creative, like, let's just like, okay, you got to kind of interpolate. Like, what do you think's in between this? You know, like, and then seeing more stuff makes you better at it as well. So it's like, you gotta have a little, I feel like just geology in general, but especially petroleum geology and geophysics, you gotta have that creative spark, you know, to be able to do it.
Oh, absolutely. When I got into geology, this is a slight tangent, but when I got into geology, I was really worried because I had a very, like, 2 + 2 = 4 brain. Like, I needed a right answer. And I would like go out to outcrop. My mom's a geologist and she's got a beautiful creative side of her brain that can like fill in blanks. And I would go up to like an outcrop and I'd be like, I don't know what this means. And she'd be like, well, you can see like this probably happened here. This probably happened here. And like, she can like logically work through it. And I was like, but is it the answer? And she's like, well, no, it could have gone this way. It could have been like this. And there's multiple possibilities. And I'm like, but we need like a formula and an answer. And then over time with experience and practice, I got better at like the logical, creative side of things. But it's so true. Geology is so, you don't always have the right answer. There's not one answer. There's multiple, or there's a range, and it's hard to get that super specific, and you know, and people might interpret things differently. That's the way it is in geology, and that was so hard for my brain to wrap around for so long. But it's exactly what you say. It's making the two sides of your brain work together.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah, that's how my mentor was, and he was just like, well, what do you think happened here? And you're like, what do you mean? Aren't you gonna like teach us about the outcome?
Yeah.
He's like, you got enough tools to figure it out, or at least come to a reasonable answer. You tell me. And I was like, these drive us nuts.
Oh yeah, and so many field instructors do that. They're like, well, what do you think? And then you're like, well, what's the answer? And they're like, well, there isn't an answer. There's some wrong answers, but there's not a one right answer, you know? And
yeah, if you look at the sandstone and tell me that it's like I don't know, like granite, you're probably not in the right ballpark.
Yeah, there's wrong answers. But there are multiple right answers too.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Okay, I'm curious, and this is one I love to ask because it really like gets into how amazing it is to be a geologist, even though everything we've talked about up to this point is also getting at that. But what's one moment that made you feel really proud to be a geologist?
So I took this in context with my career and helping to build things is kind of what I did, as opposed to just like, I just love being a geo, which I do, you know, to be fair. But we actually helped sell a company. So just recently, within the last year, I guess it was now, we sold a company for $2 billion. So we, like a small private equity company, and we went from 20,000 barrels a day, and then when I joined, to 40,000 barrels a day, which is insane for our little tiny acreage footprint that we had there. So it was awesome that we got all that production, and it was kind of bittersweet because we had a really good team of people over there. It was awesome. Like, we were like, I don't know, like maybe 20 people in that office. Like, we were not a lot of people, and for us to be producing that much was kind of insane. So that was like really cool to be a part of something like that. So, and now I'm part of another private equity backed company. So usually the goal of that is to build it up and produce as much production as possible, and then usually sell it or to go public. I think this one might be looking to go public. We'll see. Right now we're still private, and they've been around for about 10 years, which is a long time. So for private equity anyways.
Yeah. Wow. I didn't know how that worked. That's so interesting.
So you've got all the like big public, like your Exxons, your BPs and stuff, where people buy into it publicly as shareholders, or you can have larger investors that have shares. And then for us, it's like you have like a board of people. You might have like 5 people that manage like a bunch of private people's money, like I don't know, a bunch of rich families or whatever, and they're part of that board. And then usually the people that are our CEO or COO have a say as well as what happens in the company. And they say, hey, we want to do this, or we want this return on investment, sort of thing. And then usually by about year 7, a lot of the times they're like, okay, we've gotten a good return. We'd like to sell the company now because we've made, we've added a lot of value to it by having more production. So that's usually what happens. So, but this time, this company, the rate of return is so good they don't want to sell it. So it's like they might go public, or we might just keep doing what we're doing because the investors are happy. And the team that we have has been very carefully curated. So I was very thankful to be brought on board. But I'm also local. So when I was looking for something, they're like, oh, we know Julia. Like, yeah. Oh, and she does what we need. So that's great.
Geology is sometimes such a little small world.
Yeah.
If you get in, like you said, you had some internships here and there. Like if you have that and then you kind of move around, you get to know a lot of people, and it really helps with the career trajectory later on, just knowing people.
And Fort Worth is a very tight-knit community. Again, anybody that's here in DFW, like join the Dallas Geologic Society or the Fort Worth Geologic Society, and we all kind of know each other. So like when I went to apply for this job that I'm in now, I actually just like LinkedIn messaged. I was like, hey, just want to let y'all know that I applied. I think we're going to sell over here, and I'm going to be looking for something new. And they were like, oh yeah, that sounds great. And then they brought me in, and I was like, hey, by the way, we sold. And they were like, cool, that means we can hire you now.
Oh my gosh, that's really cool.
So your network is very important, is something I stress to a lot of students that I talk to. Yes,
absolutely. Okay, moving to the next question. This one's also a really fun one. What surprised you the most when you started working for the energy industry?
Just like how passionate everybody is, like at the company, like how much, like especially these small companies, how much people care and put pride and love into their work, and they just want to be like, this is the best answer I have. Let's go do it. And being able to collaborate and help each other has been really good. I hear some horror stories from some of the larger companies, people try to steal your work and all that crap. But with the companies I'm with, because they're so carefully curated on staff and personality types and stuff like that, just how kind and collaborative, and then the amount of grace that they give you, because you're working with like I mentioned, incomplete data sets, read between the lines, and you're just like, like I'm looking at plus or minus, so many feet for this landing. And then as long as you're within that range, cool, we can pivot, kind of thing. Like nobody's going to get super upset with you for, the data you have being bad, and you made the best decision you could with it.
That's a really good point, because I think a lot of people, a lot of, like Jess even talked about in mining, both of these industries are industries where if you're in a certain position, you got to be making some very expensive decisions. So to have that kind of flexibility, or people around you that are supportive and are like, look, you did the best with what you had, like, let's try again. It's hard to have all of that pressure to make those decisions if, there's a chance that you could be wrong and,
I know. I try not to put that pressure on my shoulders. But yeah, it's not uncommon to see. We have these things in our industry that are called AFEs, so approval for expenditure. But it's not uncommon for that. So that's drilling completing cost for between $6 and $9 million. Like that's what it costs to drill these horizontal wells. That's like sticker shock, right? Because that's like more than anybody will even have in retirement. So it's just like, but nuts. To us, it's just like it started to become like normal numbers to me,
which is crazy.
Which makes it less pressure on myself, because I'm like, oh yeah, it's like 6
to 9,
whatever, that's fine, kind of thing. So it becomes more normal over time. So
wow. That is insane. Okay, before we get to the rest of the viewer questions, are there any other common myths or misconceptions about your job or the oil and gas industry in general that you'd like to bust?
The president does not control oil prices, regardless of who they are. It does not control gasoline prices. I want people to stop thinking that. It drives me absolutely nuts. So really, it's a supply and demand thing. Let's say like Saudi Arabia or something, or Russia decides, hey, we want to produce more oil. Then because there's more supply but demand has remained about the same, it'll tank the price of oil. But then they might decide, oh, we want price of oil to be more, so they'll start cutting. So they're an organization of, it's called OPEC, so it usually sets the supply, which sets the price. And price will change because of the way people hedge. So like a lot of the times people will hedge for natural gas prices to go up in the winter, because Europe gets really cold in the winter, and they have a lot of natural gas power plants. So it makes sense that they were like, oh, I'm going to hedge that it's going to be up, or there's more demand in the winter, which there almost always is. Or wars are another thing that'll do it, because the supply will go up or down depending upon who's fighting who or whatever. So it's a very like geopolitical sort of thing, as opposed to just what's happening in the US or like the one sitting president, which doesn't make any sense. So they can yell about drilling, or they can yell about wanting to regulate everything more, but it really doesn't change things a whole lot in the grand scheme of things. It's a lot of these larger things that nobody can control. So
that's such a wonderful point. Oh my gosh. And that's such a misconception. I'm glad you hit on that.
Yeah, it drives me crazy. My relatives, I'm like, it's OPEC. I'm like, go yell at OPEC. I'm like, this politician has nothing to do with this. So, yeah.
Okay, moving to viewer questions. The first one, I'm actually curious about this too, even as a geologist, because I don't know nearly as much as I should. But it's just simply, how do we actually find oil and gas underground? What are the kind of clues at the surface that we look for as geologists?
A lot of the time, you don't see anything at the surface. It's highly dependent upon what we call the play type, which is the basin or rock type. So like, are you in the, Permian Basin or the Williston Basin or the Michigan Basin, and what rock type is there? So, and then on top of that, you also have what we call the petroleum system, which if you take a petroleum geology class, you'll talk about. So you need to have a source. Where is the oil coming from? And then is it mature? On top of that, did it get enough heat and pressure to turn into oil and gas and migrate where it was going to go, or did it get overcooked, or was it undercooked? So it has to be cooked at the right heat and temperature, kind of like a baking recipe almost, otherwise it won't turn into the right thing. So you have your source, you have your reservoir, so that's like where the oil would get trapped. So it has to have a way to either like migrate a lot of the time, unless we're doing shales, but that's something else. So let's say there's like a sand that's above it. So that sand will have a certain amount of porosity where the oil and gas can migrate up to it and then be stored in that reservoir. So when we go poke a straw or a hole in it, it'll then flow up that straw. Is kind of the good way to think of it. And then you have to have a trap. So you have to have something that's trapping in the oil so it stays in the reservoir. So a lot of the times, and that also kind of goes with seals. So you have to have something trapping it or something sealing it, usually a little bit of both. Sometimes they're kind of interrelated. So that a lot of the times in like old conventionals, you'd be looking for like the top part of a fold would be a really good place to go. Or you'll have something that's faulted, and you'll have a fault trap because you're like, oh, that should be trapped here. It can't go past that. Or you can have stratigraphic traps where things go from being really thick to super duper thin, and then maybe there's a shale or something on the other side where it can't go anywhere. So you have all of these different types of traps that are in there.
Oh.
And then there's 3 different like rock types I think that are worth talking about. So the first one's the one that I work, which are carbonates and sometimes shales on the Central Basin platform. So these carbonates usually have migrated oil in them. So the carbonates are, at least the stuff I'm looking at, are old reef systems. So you can imagine, because it's got a lot of organic matter in it, that's kind of ends up like cooking at, your heat and pressure that you have, and gets stuck in the pore spaces of like the old reef system, more or less. So when we get down there, and usually we have to frack or acid frack it sometimes to get it to flow into the wellbore. So all of those different cracks that are in there. And very similar to that are shales. So shales, in this whole shale revolution we have, are self-sourcing. So they are the source rock. So you don't have to have like a trap and a seal and all that. You just have to find the source. And from that, they're so organic rich, a lot of these shales, and have already been given enough heat and pressure to be matured from dead ocean basin critters, think like planktons and stuff like that. It's usually what a lot of these are. And then we frack into these because they're really tight. They don't have that porosity that like sands or even sometimes carbonates can have. So we frack them with like water and sand to grab all of that source rock, good organic stuff, and get it to flow into the wellbore. And then a lot of times we pump it, kind of like sucking out a straw, as opposed to just having the straw and have it naturally flowing. We use a pump to kind of suck on the straw to pull more of it out of these really tight shales that are there. And then the old wells, which are sands. So a lot of the times, like I said, that's the easiest one, where you're like, you have sand unit, you got a seal above it, something's migrated into it, you just poke a hole in it, you go, the sand's here. And then it just flows up once you figure out where that sand is and how deep it is. Those are probably the easiest ones to drill. And they require the most prospecting, because you have to put your well in a smart spot, as opposed to, if you find a shale, you could probably put a horizontal well through it, if it's mature.
So, and that's the prospecting is what, like, instead of seeing clues at the surface, you're using like seismic data and, logs to figure out what's below the surface, right?
Yeah, so similar to that, so like how we find it other than like the petroleum system is looking for funny looking things is what my advisor used to call it. So FLTs. He's like, look for the funny looking things in the data. So if
Gotta have an acronym for everything.
we really do. Oil likes to be like that. I'm getting better with it, but every once in a while I have to be like, what's that one? And I have like anyway, I got a list in my notebook because I'm still learning a lot of them. But yeah, but if you're a geoscience student, I think really the big thing to understand are well logs. It's kind of how we image the Earth below the Earth's surface. So if we drill one of those wells straight down, through the sands or whatever like that, we can then send these well logs, which use physics, things that measure natural gamma ray, resistivity, transit time, and sonic logs, that sort of thing, bulk densities, porosities, all of that. And you can get a really good view of what's happening with those rocks. And they come up as little squiggly lines that you read. So you drop it down to the bottom and then pull it up really slow, and it'll read all of the rocks until we get out to the top. And then you can take all of those discrete points of all of the wells that have been drilled on your map. And we've been producing oil and gas for over 100 years now, or just about 100 years now, I guess. And we can go through and grab all these wells and these well logs, and then you can go, oh, hey, that formation's here. Oh, and now it's up here, and now it's down here. And you can go, oh, that's an anticline. There's this nice little fold in there. Oh, I want to put my well, next to this one that did really well, or whatever. So it's like kind of finding the spaces in between. But you'll want to know well logs, how wireline works. It tells us about rock fluid properties. Seismic data is often really, really helpful as well, where we can't see the areas in between with well logs. The seismic can help you figure out what that in between and what's happening there a lot of the time. So those are probably the things I use most of the time.
And you kind of already hit on some of this, but types of data and technology you use to do this. But are there any other like fun gadgets you get to use in this job?
Yeah, I guess a lot of it is software programs and becoming proficient with those. So if you can get those as like, maybe not so much as an undergrad student, but if you can get your hands on those as a grad student, that could be really helpful because they do a lot of really cheap licenses for educational purposes. So those programs would be StarSteer if you want to do geosteering. I use something called Kingdom, which is like kind of your mid-budget option, I suppose. So I can use it to look at seismic data, well log tops, and you can even do geospatial data. You can do some GIS stuff in there too. So it's just trying to integrate all your data. And then there's also an older program called Petra that a lot of small shops use. And then if you work for a major, one of the biggest programs is going to be Petrel. Petrel is fantastic. I've seen of people using PaleoScan is also fantastic, but yeah, that would be your list of softwares that would be like your bread and butter. So I don't get to use like all the cool geophysical, magnetometers and gravimeters and stuff, but yeah, the softwares are like the big thing, and those could be really fun.
But there are so many people that I know. There were a few viewer questions. I don't even think I could include them all, but there were some that were asking like, if I'm computer savvy and I know a bunch of softwares, like, could I go into this? Is there a position that I could do? And yeah, like, absolutely. Like you just said.
Yeah, having a geologist that can do programming, you could work on improving those programs. And because you have the geology know-how and the coding know-how, you'd be like a unicorn in that industry. If that's something I'm not joking. Like, there's some people that have made some really good money that are on my LinkedIn network I've talked to.
Good
and they're
to
just
know.
like, yeah, I'm a geologist that likes to code. And they're like, yeah, I just like fix all the software bugs and then I make sure it works. And because I'm a geologist, I know how the program's supposed to function or how I would want it to function because they are a geologist. Yeah.
Okay, well, there you go. Good advice for students out there. Okay, so next viewer question is, do you see a time when gasoline, diesel fuel, and other products will be restricted to specially licensed vehicles like law enforcement, trucking, etc.?
So this is a fantastic question because I think it's actually exactly the opposite, which is interesting. So a lot of consumers are actually moving away from electric vehicles currently. It's been a big thing in the news lately because of the cost to maintain them, the lack of charging infrastructure, and range anxiety, a lot of it, or people that have to then go replace the battery. That battery cost, a lot of people don't account for it because people are bad at budgeting in general, but they can be thousands of dollars to replace a lot of those lithium-ion batteries. And they're not very recyclable, which is unfortunate. So what I think is really interesting is it makes sense to have electric vehicles that are like what I call homing pigeon vehicles. So things that are going to stay in the immediate area. So things like fire and EMS and police that are just cruising around the immediate area that they monitor, would make a lot of sense to have them have electric vehicles
Oh,
because
I
they
never
can
thought
charge
about that.
them
Yeah.
when they're at the station, right? So it's like that actually would be really good because they don't need the mileage or the range a lot of the time.
That's a
to
great
go where
point.
they need to go. And I'm like, that actually be really good. But yeah, lithium-ion batteries just are not as recyclable. Lithium usually comes from groundwater. So you pump up groundwater that's rich in it and then evaporate it. So it's kind of an energy-intensive process a lot of the times. So it's not, I don't know that electric car, trust me, I was super on the electric car hype train when it came out. There's just so many issues with that we see with them most of the time. So
it's like what you said, like even making it's energy intensive. Like we need energy to make clean energy. There's a lot of those little nuances that are like, is it really doing what we want it to do in that case? And it's hard. We still need a lot of advancements, we need more geoscientists, and
the batteries will get better. There'll be something better that comes along with those. Cause I think it's a great concept. I think it's a great idea. And if you have a charger at your home and you're just going to go kart around town, it makes all the sense in the world. I mean, I like to take very long road trips and stuff. And I also like to tow things, like I'm looking at getting a trailer and I was like, I can't have an electric vehicle with the trailer because I can't tow it very far, kind of thing. So like for me, it doesn't make sense. But for a lot of people, if you're just going to stay in your town and you're like a homebody or something, get an electric car and you got a place to charge it. It's pretty good. And save for that battery replacement. It's expensive. So yeah, but keep in mind, if you drive an electric car, but your nearby power plant is a coal-fired power plant, which have not been totally phased out yet in the U.S., you're actually doing more harm than good if you were driving a just a gasoline or diesel powered vehicle. Yes, because you're plugging in your electricity to a coal plant.
Oh my God, I never thought about that.
Nobody ever thinks about that. Yeah, it was something I saw a comic friend of mine put on LinkedIn the other day. I was like, oh, I never thought about it that way. But yeah, if you drive an electric vehicle in like West Virginia where they have coal plants, like that doesn't make any sense. But if you drive an electric vehicle in Las Vegas where there's a ton of hydroelectric power, then yeah, you probably are driving a much cleaner vehicle minus some of the battery problems. But once those get better, you'll be good to go.
Yeah. Wow. That's such a consideration, where you live, where your power comes from. That's a great point. Last question, I think, before we get into more like student-based things, is there tension in the field of geology? I found this viewer question very interesting because I have opinions, but I'll see what you say.
Yeah.
Is there tension in the field of geology among your colleagues due to concerns around climate change?
Yeah, so like there can be, but there doesn't have to be, is kind of the way that I think of it. So like politically charged stuff always gets really crazy. It gets tribalized and a lot of just like us versus them as opposed to like the gray area. And the thing is, most things, a lot of our conversation today exists in this gray area where it's just like, okay, this isn't quite right and this isn't quite right either, and y'all need to meet in the middle to kind of figure this out, because it's like we still need oil because that's how our infrastructure is built and because a lot of our products have it in it. But what can we phase out? What do we not need to put oil in our products for, without really hurting the consumer, I suppose, is really part of it, or maybe we just need to raise wages so people can, afford their taterware versus the plastic, paper, plates sort of thing, whatever, so like things can get really crazy and just completely out of proportion. And the thing is, if you do want change or you think that like, hey, like we really do need to be making these changes, the best thing you can do is vote and call your representative and say, hey, I think our answer is really somewhere that's more this gray area. And, I think that this is something I really believe in. And, especially like your local people, maybe your state senator won't care, but like, your local people usually are pretty receptive to that kind of stuff. So like making change on a small scale, like your town or city, or even me, like city of Fort Worth people, like reaching out to them being like, hey, I think that we should have more parks or green space because that really helps with carbon capture. It gives people a third space to go hang out. Like that's important or whatever. Making those small changes is really good. And then on top of that, we also kind of, I don't know, a lot of the oil people have kind of segregated themselves in a way. So it's like, I don't know. I grit my teeth sometimes talking to some of these older folks where they're just like, we should keep drilling. And I'm like, that's not the answer.
I was going to ask your opinion on this because when I saw this comment initially, and maybe it's just because I'm in academic circles mainly, but
Yeah.
I was like, no, there's no tension, because even with the people that are in industry, we all understand the concerns around climate change. It's just that we can't do away with this completely yet, and that it's fueling a lot of the transition, and we still need it for that. It's just that there's this gray area that people don't understand. So when I first saw this comment, I was like, I don't think there's any tension. I think we need each other to go to this
there needs to
singular...
be more people talking, exactly, as opposed to like the oil people being like, you green people are crazy.
Yeah,
the green people being like, you're destroying the environment. It's like, no, you need to work together.
Yes. And I see most of the, at least like the young people like you that I talk to, are of that mindset. But I don't know, maybe in your position with some of the older folks, there's different opinions.
Yeah, the older folks are a little more set in their way, and they're more just like, oil over here forever, you know, and they're just like, I kind of have to grit my teeth and just kind of nod every once in a while at some of the meetings with some of the old timers. But usually a lot of the younger folks and even the millennials that are a little bit older than me, they kind of understand it. And they're just like, we're here providing a commodity, and the hope is that like somebody who is better at the engineering and environmental is going to figure out how to make solar cells really efficient, or
efficient enough to be
or we're going to make nuclear power more accessible to people by putting these little baby reactors in, like, you know, city centers that, you know, don't have a chance of melting down in a bad way or whatever, you know. So it just depends on people having to work together through these policies a lot of the time. So a lot of it's beyond what I can do as one person. I just try to, like I said, be environmentally conscious and responsible with what it is we're doing, but then also keep in mind that I provide energy, so whenever you turn your light on, your light does turn on, you know, sort of thing. Or you need to go somewhere, okay, your electric car's powered, because we're natural gas powered here in Texas in most places, or you turn on your vehicle and you can put gas in your tank, you know, like that sort of thing. So, and then all of the different, anything that's plastic around you at all, you know, has something, comes from petrochemicals. So,
which is so much still, and that's not going to be cut out in a day, you know.
It's not ideal, but it's not going to be cut out immediately. You know what I mean? It's like, if you care,
it's a transition.
It's a transition. It's like, hey, like, if you really hate polyester nylon, go buy your 100% cotton, you know, shirt kind of thing. Some of it is your own, like, choices that you make if you're in the financial position to do so. Not a lot of people
But exactly
are,
what you said earlier, like, unless we change wages or the costs of things, I mean, it's the cost thing. And like you said earlier, the demand is always going to go toward the low cost thing.
The cheaper thing,
Yeah, it's definitely a transition. But speaking of kind of how we just talked about with some older folks with different mindsets, and how younger folks have new, great, you know, mindsets for the future. I know some of the viewers were a little bit worried about the future of the career opportunities in this field, specifically in oil and gas, especially due to the transition and everything. One viewer asking, is this a dying career due to the switch to green energy? So what do you think about the future outlook for geoscientists in this energy sector? And do you think petroleum geologists will stick around for a bit?
Yeah, I think we're going to be here for a little while yet. And the big thing that we're running into in a lot of the AAPG meetings, if anybody's ever been in person, is that it's a lot of boomers. And a lot of these boomers are retiring very soon, or, you know, passing away. As some of them are very old, you know, that I run into. And I'm like, you're still here? And they're just like, yeah, we're just hanging out, still working, you know, kind of thing. And I'm just like, y'all, go retire and travel the world or something. You worked in oil. Like, you got the money to go travel. Go do it, man. But they have a lot of really good technical knowledge. So listening to them and talking to them and learning skills from them tends to be really fantastic. A lot of the time. So they are going to be gone, and we are going to need some people to come in and replace them. And we can talk about salary bands and benefits and stuff they give you as well in general, because I actually have the data on that. I can give it to you.
Yeah, let's hear it. Let's do that.
Yeah. So there's a company, I think they're called CSI Recruiting, and they put out a survey every single year to all their oil and gas workers. So they break it down by role, by city, and then by years of experience. Okay, so this is for geologists. Okay, so geologist base salary, 0 to 3 years experience is $127K. And then there's usually
average?
That's on average between all metros and everybody that answered the survey. So it's $127K and a 15% bonus.
My God.
4 to 10 years of experience, which is where the band that I'm in is about, it says $148K and 20% bonus. Then 11 to 20 is $168K, 20% bonus. And then if you go 21 to 30, so when you get close to the end of your career, it's $197K or 24% bonus. Anybody that's over 30 plus years, it says 206K. Usually that's a consultant. 22% bonus, which is why the bonus is lower, because a lot of those people are consultants. Regionally, in the Dallas-Fort Worth metro area where I live, our average is $162,000 and a 20% bonus. Houston is 181. That's kind of the big hub. And that's a 24% bonus. They're real big on bonuses in Houston. I do know that. The Denver Rocky Mountain region is 154,000 and 17%. But you get to live in Denver, and that's kind of awesome. So, and then the mid-continents, that's like your Tulsas, Oklahoma City, that sort of thing. So that's 172K at about 18% bonus. And Midland, which is where the Permian Basin, West Texas is, not the nicest place to live, but it's okay. It has everything you need and nothing you want. That's what we say a lot of the time about it. Not about, some people love it, you know, to be safe. And that's 173, so really similar to MidCon, and they give a 24% bonus a lot of the times. And average paid time off is 3.4. I actually get 5, which is really nice. So that's why I make a point to go somewhere and then make sure nobody can get a hold of me.
Yeah, when you said you travel a lot, I was wondering that, but 5 that's wonderful, man.
It's really nice. It's based upon my master's degree and then years of experience I've had in industry. That's how they calculated that here. Yeah, I mean, it pays really, really well.
That is awesome. I did not realize that. Now I'm considering switching. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, it's like the risk, is the risk worth the reward to you? That's the question that they need to ask themselves. Yeah.
Well, and it's the same for any career. I feel like for me, I always was so passionate about teaching that I knew I wanted to go the academic route.
And you got to make sure it's something you love to do. Otherwise, it's not worth doing.
Like, and for me, yes, it's a lot less pay than going the industry route, but it is what I'm passionate about. So if you are passionate about industry or, seismic surveys and well logs and interpreting that and like the challenge and the big decisions, like, that's something even Jess talked about, how she had a lot of pride in the decisions she got to make as, when she was working for the mine. So, it's what you're passionate about. You got to make that decision. Is the risk worth the reward? Because everything has risk, Okay, I swear we're getting to the end. Yeah. Okay, so a lot of the student viewers wanted to know what to major in, what courses to take, what degree to get, bachelor's versus master's, to make them the most competitive to employers in this field.
Yeah, for sure. So if you want to work with, like what I do on the upstream side and be making some of those salaries, you do need a master's degree at a minimum. And a lot of the times with the majors, they like a lot of the PhD students as well. Used to be the other way around. Used to be PhD was overqualified. They didn't want to pay you that much. So they hired more master's students. But I think since COVID, they kind of swapped that around a little bit, where they've been hiring more specialists and people with PhDs that kind of are really good at that one special thing in the big companies. The small companies, they just need the master's degree. And they want to know that you can wear a lot of hats. So you're like, yes, I can do operations. Yes, I can do development. Okay, yeah, I understand geology, but I know these things about geophysics or geochem. So being a little more well-versed and more general can be really good at the small companies. So it depends on what you want, too. Do you want to work with a big company or you want to work with a small one? They have different perks and benefits and pros and cons like anything else. So the other thing I recommend for students is it's also networking is huge, in this, especially in this industry. It's not always what you know, it is who you know. That is actually what helped me get my last 2 jobs and to stay here in Fort Worth, was that I had a relatively strong network. And actually, this is the first year I felt like I've had a really good network of people going. And I just poke people every once in a while on LinkedIn and I'd be like, hey, so-and-so, how's it going? Just to keep up with people and see what they're all up to and be able to send them job postings when they need it. Sort of thing. So when I'm in that position, hopefully they'll be able to help me. That sort of thing. Like just being a good friend to people, more or less, even if they're just like a coworker or acquaintance, just keeping tabs on folks. And I know it can be really intimidating for a lot of students, but to send a lot of those cold messages on LinkedIn or emails or stuff, or go to these events. I actually ran a student mentorship program because I know how scary it can be. At the AAPG Southwest section we just had this past spring. So we had students come in and we assigned them a mentor. I was one of those mentors, and we took them around the conference. We went to a talk together. We went to talk to some of the vendors, and I introduced them to people that I thought they'd be really good to talk to based upon what their interest or what their master's or PhD project was on. So that way they're not just wandering around a conference by themselves.
I
love
that.
Can be really intimidating. So we're going to try and implement that at least in the Southwest section moving forward, but we'll see if it takes off. But yes, go to those meetings. Even if there isn't a mentorship program, go meet people. And as an introvert, that's really hard for me.
Yes, me too.
But go meet people.
What you just said is so cool. I love that you had the mentor, like, take them around and introduce them to people, because my first couple meetings, I was just like wandering around, scared. I would sit in the back of talks. I would never ask a question. I would never introduce myself to anybody. I would walk through the posters and I wouldn't want to like stay at one too long because I wouldn't want to start a conversation. I was just so nervous. And like having somebody there to be like, no, it's just a human. Like,
it's okay.
Yeah. Oh my God. And you make such good connections when you finally break that barrier and actually, go and talk to some people.
Oh, and with that, bring little business cards with you too. So yes. I as part of this is just being unemployed enough times, but I have little personal business cards that I make that have my first, last name and my degrees on them, BS Geology, MS Geophysics, and then my email. And I think I might have a phone number on it. And then, let's see here, what else did I have on? I've got a couple bullet points. Oh, for people going into oil, it used to be called the AAPG Student Expo. I think it got a little too expensive for them to run. It is now the HGS, so Houston Geologic Society Student Expo. So that is an event where you can go to and bring a poster, but you don't have to bring a poster. If you can, absolutely do it. And you get to talk to recruiters. I don't know if it's 2 days, might be 1 day now, but when I was doing it, it was 2 days, and you get to just talk to oil and gas recruiters. You go wait in a line, you have your resume, and then you give them your 2-minute elevator pitch.
Wow.
And so you walk up and say, I'd be like, hi, I'm Julia. I do this. This is why I want to work in oil, kind of things. I have these really cool skills, and I'm also working on these things, and I would love to work for y'all this summer, or whatever my pitch was at the time.
That's so cool.
If they like your pitch and they'll go through and review your resume, they'll call you back in to do an interview on the second day.
Oh, wow.
And that's actually how I got my internship.
No way. That's so nice, because so many times like you're applying to things online and it's just a form, and like
it's terrible.
You don't get to make an impression in person. And like there you actually get to interact, and like they get to know your personality. And if, that's one of the most important things, honestly.
Yeah. And if there's a booth set up at these conferences that you go to, so other than just going to network, sometimes companies, like a lot of the majors and stuff like that, or if you're interested in academics, sometimes the schools will have stuff set up, and you can just go talk to them. And at least then the recruiters, which tend to be the same people for a handful of years. So if you weren't quite ready, like I wasn't quite ready for an internship my first year, and I could see that, like my skills were kind of lacking. But then once I had developed those skills a little more and I'd met those recruiters again, they're like, wow, you've learned a lot in the last year. And I was like, yeah, kind of thing, and got a number of interviews and then took the best offer from that I thought would best fit me. So
that's cool.
Go to that event. It's a fantastic event.
Actually, that is perfectly in line with the next viewer question, which was, what are the top companies recruiting petroleum geologists right now?
Yeah, it's I'm trying to think of who I saw recently. Let's pull this up. There's a couple at Elk Range Royalties that we have in Dallas. So that's actually a company that does like land acquisition, which is really interesting. So you can kind of do that side of things too, other than the upstream. There's a couple entry-level positions, or sometimes you'll see geosteering or geotech. The pay on those are a little bit lower, but they are still on the upstream side. And that could be a really good place to start, because you get to see all of the different types of data, and you're kind of like a data master. You get really good with the programs and how to load in data, how to load in surveys, well logs, seismic data, all that sort of stuff. And you keep the database squeaky clean, so the geologists can then use it and not have to worry about all the data management process of things. So those geotech positions, which I'm seeing one here in Dallas, is really good. Hillwood Energy is another recent one here. Matador is always hiring. They're always hiring operations geologists in Dallas. They have a really good intern population that's there. Chevron, I saw, was hired a good amount of interns this summer. Murphy did as well. Let's see what else we got on here. Exxon always does. We have, let's see here, Civitas. I think that's it for our Metroplex. So Houston has a lot more. Dallas is a little bit on the smaller side. But we used to have Pioneer, but they got bought by Exxon. So now we have Exxon's down there. BP's always hiring people too. Same thing with Shell for internships. I don't think they've ever actually had a true hiring freeze out of their internship program, because even during COVID, they did hire a handful of geologists. I think almost all of those companies did. So they always want to make sure they have fresh new people and ideas coming in. So they'll never have a true freeze. From what I understand, at least that's been, I don't know if that's different nowadays. That's what the company policies were when I was looking at positions. So they're always looking at somebody. There's just, maybe there'll be less competition now because there's not as many students chomping at the bit to get at it.
Yeah.
So might have a really good shot if you have a good do all your networking, go to those events.
Are there specific internships or programs that you'd recommend for students?
Yeah, the Imperial Barrel Award. So AAPG puts on this competition called the Imperial Barrel Award, and that is where you get a data set and you get to work exactly like a petroleum geologist with a mentor, usually you get an industry mentor and you get like an academic mentor, like one of your teachers or professors or something like that. And you get to go through in a whole semester, you get to work up a project, and then you get to pitch prospects to a panel of judges. And having that, even if you don't place or do well or anything, if you go through with that process, other than learning a lot, it looks really good on a resume because they know that you're familiar with the process enough to probably be able to do and be successful at an internship. Yeah. So that's another thing I recommend to people.
Yeah, that's a great one. If you want to go into this industry, that's like a gold standard of great thing to have on your resume. Absolutely.
Yeah. The other thing you can look for are what I call local internships. So I work for a small company here, and our closest university is TCU here in Fort Worth, Texas Christian University. So if we needed an intern, we're probably not going to post it like, I don't know, like in the fall, like most of these, super majors do. We're going to post it like, I don't know, like April, March or something like that, like halfway through spring semester because we're crazy. And then we're just going to like probably go grab a student from the local university to come be an intern and do a project because we have something we need help with for the summer. And those can be really great too. So you can poke around your local town if you're in a place that's kind of oily and see if there's like some small companies that are around and just like connect with some of those folks on LinkedIn. Like if you see like a geologist for, whatever X small company, go poke them and just be like, hey, you got any internship opportunities? I actually had somebody do that. And that was a student. And I was like, man, good for them. They're already taking the advice before I gave it. I did not have something specific at my company, but I was able to point them to a couple other people that they could talk to. And I said they might because they've hired people in the past. And then they did get an internship. But I was like, good for them. So yeah, reach out because some of those little shops will just kind of like take some local people for the summer just to like give you a project or because we need help with something.
That's so cool.
This is just too much. We need somebody to help us run some of this project, sort of thing. So like, look for the small stuff too.
That's a great point. And also just like poking people on LinkedIn or emails, like if you find people that are working at a company you want to work for and doing the things you want to do and you find their email or their LinkedIn, there are internships that are out there and have applications and are real and you can apply. But like I got my first couple really amazing internships, even in more so research, but in other fields, I'm sure this is how things work too. But I just emailed people and there was no official like position available, but I just said, hey, I have a summer. Can I come work with you for a summer on whatever you're doing? Because I want to do what you do. And they had extra funding and I did. I got a funded internship. And, this is like, that's how you get the ball rolling. That's how you get your foot in the door. So it's so important to do those things.
That's actually how I got my last job. There was no job posting. I just reached out. So I had a friend that worked there, and I think he knew he was actually leaving the company for a different position. But before any of us knew that, I reached out to him and I reached out to the CEO of the company because they're small enough. I figured, maybe he'll get back to me. And he did get back to me, and he was like, yeah, actually, we might have a position open. I was just talking to, so-and-so about it because you were talking to him at the society. And I was like, that's cool. He's like, yeah, our HR person will reach out to you. He's like, thanks for reaching out, kind of thing, just after I introduced myself. And they hired me later, a week later did the interview me and then hired me that same day, more or less. And just like, oh, you can start on Monday. And I was like, sweet, no position. And then I came in and crushed it. They actually gave me a huge raise at the end of the year because they had felt like they had underpaid me a bit because I was like, I just need a job so I don't lose my house. Like, I was like, let me just come work for you. I'll do it for cheap. And if I suck, you can get rid of me. But I think I'm going to prove my worth real quick here, And then at the end of the year,
I think
it was like, I don't know, like 4 months maybe I had worked there, maybe 6 months. And then immediately they were just like, oh yeah, like this is great. Here's a raise. And I was like, thanks. They're like, we think that'll help align with what you should be making because you do a lot of work around here.
Wow. Oh, but that's so cool. I love that. And that was also smaller company?
Smaller company. Yep. The only large company I've worked for was the internship. Everybody else has been small. I love the small company vibe. That's what for me.
It seems like it's a really cool vibe. And yeah, like you said, if you deserve it, you get a raise. I feel like that's such a small company thing to do. That's so cool. That's awesome. Okay, last couple questions that I love to ask. What is your least favorite part of the job, and what's your favorite part of the job?
Yeah, I think the least favorite thing is like having to actually like mentally kind of be on 24/7, especially when you are a small company and we don't have an ops geo. Like we kind of hand that responsibility around when we have rigs. So sometimes I have, I have a night geo steerer that keeps an eye on things. But if we end up out of zone or anything like that, he will call me at 3 a.m. Real nice Canadian guy that we got. So it's kind of funny where like, my phone will ring and I value my sleep, like getting up's hard. I'm just like, ugh. And then I have this nice Canadian dude who's like, hey bud, I think we might be out of zone and I need your help to pick, he's super nice. So I'm just like, oh yeah, I got you. That's fine. Let's go ahead and figure it out. And he's like, I already have some options for you. You just got to look at your email and tell me which one we're going to go with.
Oh, that sounds so nice.
So yeah, having to mentally be on 24/7 can be difficult, but the people that I work with make it a little bit easier, so
yeah.
That's definitely tough. But it makes up for it with a lot of good vacation time. Which is good.
Yeah.
And then the boom bust cycles are annoying. Oh God, as I've mentioned once or twice, that can be difficult. But they usually pay you enough and give you enough PTO and benefits that it usually ends up being worked with. And then just like the satisfaction of drilling and completing a really good well, and knowing that like that's, at least from my perspective, staying with my local Texans to generate electricity a lot of the time, or to make their vehicles go, or all the different products we've talked about today that go into it, like to know that that's making a more or less a positive impact on people's lives, and that hopefully we can reach across to our friends on the green side and say, hey, how can we work together to make this a more sustainable thing. So but yeah, I guess my final thoughts that I have on here is people have to look like inwards to themselves with everything they've heard from our conversation today and say, is this something you want to work? And for you, is the risk worth the reward? And then do you enjoy the challenge of doing something different every day? Or are you somebody that very much likes consistency? So you have to be the right personality type for it as well. And you have to be, especially now because it's a little bit slimmer on the hiring side, you have to want this position. You have to go in to like your master's or PhD with a plan of, I am going to work oil. And you're going to have to fight for it a little bit with your networking and job applications and the people you meet and the places that you go to these conferences and such. So yeah, give it your best shot.
Oh my gosh. Thank you for sharing so many of these incredible insights. I'm so glad I had you on. I say this all the time on my channel, but I don't like covering things that I don't have the expertise in. And this is certainly something I don't have the expertise in. So I'm really glad that I've had you on. I feel like it's very similar to when I had Jess talk about mining. I don't know anything about that. I don't know anything about oil and gas, but you gave such great perspectives and great things for people, not just students, but general people to think about and understand about this industry and its importance in our future and our transition to cleaner energies. Like, it's just a gray area that we need to move forward and to have our sustainable future. So, it's important that we have people like you out there doing this. And I'm just so glad I could bring you on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks for the conversation today.